different points. You began by suggesting that Islam today is roughly where Christianity was 500 years ago. I suppose one important difference, at least, is that nowadays we have much better weapons. And so that's, I mean, if you could imagine what the Crusades had been like if they'd had atom bombs. But then I didn't quite get the second thing you said, which was, isn't there a risk that I'm doing something or other?
Well, the people out there...
But by out there, where do you mean?
Sorry, when we came in, there were people waving banners and...
Sorry, I didn't know that. Okay.
Sorry,
what did the banners say? Perhaps I better know.
They say... Don't let Dawkins make a monkey of you.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
Well, the point I tried to make was that possibly if you just forgot about it and let religion go away, it might be better than you setting yourself up as a...
Yeah, if only, yes. I mean, I would love to think that one could just let it go away. And in this country, we are lulled into a sort of false sense of security because religion, well, Christian religion is going away in this country. But is it going to go away from the world? I don't have any great optimism. Never mind about the Middle East. Just look at America. Just look at the way every single political candidate has to, whatever their personal convictions, whatever they believe, has to pretend to be religious or they won't get elected. Don't let Dawkins make a monkey out of you. That, of course, is a clear reference to evolution. And so the people, I didn't know there were people demonstrating outside, but clearly what they are is some kind of creationist lobby, which in this country is weak, but in America, nearly 50%, by a Gallup poll, nearly 50% of people not only are creationists, they think the world is only 6,000 years old. 50% of the people who are going to elect our next president think the world, the universe, is 6,000 years old. That's not a kind of minor, trivial error. That's equivalent to believing that the width of North America from New York to San Francisco is 7.8 yards. We shall see, so maybe it will go away, but I'm not optimistic. Who was next? Lady there, sorry.
Yes. I just wanted to point out that, in my opinion anyway, littered with skyhooks, that if you look at any rational and apparently logical argument as, say, a chain of cause and effect, that eventually you arrive somewhere beyond which you can't know anymore. So, for example, you go far back enough in time, you get closer and closer, apparently, to the Big Bang. We may narrow that gap, but there is always a gap. So we've got a chain of logic, which at the ends seems to be supported by skyhooks. I think Kant made a much better argument than I can. But, so, for example, if our theory is about light are right, we can't know what goes on inside a black hole, etc. So our theories always end somewhere beyond which there is still stuff we don't know.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, that's an interesting point. I think it's a wrong one. I think what you're doing is confusing a gap in our knowledge, and of course science has many gaps in its knowledge, confusing a gap in our knowledge with a skyhook. A gap in our knowledge is just a challenge. This is something that we're working towards understanding, working towards filling the gap. So, I mean, there are plenty of gaps. You don't even need to go to the profundities of modern physics. There's a gap at the origin of life. Nobody knows how life began on this planet. We know once life had begun, we understand pretty well what happened after that. We don't know what the first step was. It's a mystery of chemistry. But we're not filling it with a skyhook. What we're doing is filling it with a kind of temporary waiting until we've found the answer, which is a very different matter. A skyhook is not just saying, well, pending future research, we're just going to have to leave that bit not filled in. A skyhook is saying, we are filling it here and now with a fairy, with a god, with an angel, with a unicorn, with something that we're positively postulating, which superficially appears to explain something, but actually doesn't. In the gaps in scientific knowledge, where we have no explanation, we're quite frank about it. We have no explanation. That's why we're working on it. There's a huge difference, I think.
I was listening to Radio 4 this afternoon. I heard you on the book programme. And you were talking about your love of science fiction, and specifically about a book by Elspeth Huxley, in which she explored the possibility or the idea that a myth is something that has developed from real events. And I wondered if you'd care to speculate on the real events that might have stimulated the myth of Christianity with its ideas of resurrection.
Very interesting. The questioner is referring to the book programme in which you have to recommend 5 works of fiction. It actually wasn't the Elspeth Huxley one. The Elspeth Huxley one is a lovely book. That's Red Strangers. It was a science fiction book by a man called Daniel F. Galloy called Dark Universe. And the plot of this is that we only learn this at the end of the book, but what actually happened in the science fiction story is that post-nuclear war catastrophe, pods of survivors were put in underground bunkers to wait out the radioactive fallout, which they did for many, many, many generations. And then they eventually emerged out into the light again. But one of these, I think it was 17 pods of survivors, something went wrong underground and the light failed. So they lived in perpetual darkness for many, many generations. And we join the story after many, many generations of living in perpetual darkness. And they've adapted pretty well. They've developed echolocation like bats and various other ways of surviving. But what's fascinating, and the questioner's bringing attention to it, is that light has remained in their vocabulary, but it's become a myth. Nobody knows what light is. Nobody's ever seen light. But they say things like, "Great light almighty," and "for light's sake." And there's a similar mythology about devils. There are the twin devils, cobalt and strontium. And we're not told, but you immediately know how that crept into the mythology. Way, way, way back in their ancestral past, they heard about cobalt and strontium as being these terrible radioactive elements that could kill you. Hydrogen himself, the arch-devil. And you gradually learn this entire mythology of this fictitious people. I'm temporizing because I can't answer the question you're asking. And what I said on this radio program was how fascinating it is that myths can arise out of what actually did once really happen. And I suppose the kind of thing one would be looking for would be to try to, those people who look at the biblical myths, stories of miracles and parting of the Red Sea and that kind of thing, and try to say what could have been the origin of that. And there are people who do that. Oddly enough, having just said how interesting I find that science fiction book, I've never got terribly interested in the attempts that people have made to account for religious beliefs, religious myths in terms of something that might really have happened. So I don't go out of my way to account for the parting of the Red Sea as being caused by an earthquake or something of that sort.
I did ask specifically about the Christian.
Christian, okay. Well, I don't know what would have given rise to the Christian myths of crucifixion, resurrection, of atonement for original sin, the whole Christian message. Certainly, ideas of atonement, ideas of scapegoating are very widespread in anthropological accounts.